Okay, true story. 8 friends gathered around a backyard dinner party in Washington, D.C. They're celebrating a restaurant one of them had just opened. It was about 10 p.m. There's a fellow there named Michael. He had his wife and daughter, and he was talking to his wife when he noticed a hand and the barrel of a gun come between them. A man of medium build in a clean sweatsuit stepped up and pointed the gun at his daughter, and then pointed the gun at his wife, and looked Michael in the face and said, "Give me your money or I'm going to start effing shooting." And it was an odd coincidence that no one at the party had any money. So they started casting around, trying to figure out what they were going to do to dissuade this man, and the first thing that they came on was guilt. What would your mother think of you? Didn't work. I haven't got any effing mother. So now it's tense. And Michael's looking around and he's saying, someone's going to get hurt, maybe everybody. At which point, a woman named Christina stepped up and tried a different tack. "Hey, we're all celebrating," she said. "Why don't you sit down and share a glass of wine?" Michael said it was like a switch flipped. You could feel it. The man took the glass of wine. "Damn, that's a good glass of wine." Michael offered him the bottle. He put his gun in his pocket, reached for some cheese. He said, "Hey, could I have a hug?" Christina hugged him. Mike's wife hugged him. How about a group hug? They all huddled around him, gave him a hug, and when they let him go, he said, "I'm sorry," and walked out with his glass of wine. So what happened there? Michael says he knows what happens. It was a miracle, and you can see why he would think that, but I want to propose something different happened. I want to propose that was compassion done powerfully. And by compassion, I don't mean the casual phrases that we throw off. I don't mean, "I feel terrible for you," "I can't imagine how you feel," or "I know just how you feel." I don't mean that. I mean finding and meeting fundamental needs. And by fundamental human needs, I don't mean a glass of wine, a chunk of cheese, and a stack of cash. I mean those universal things that we feel we've got to have to survive as tribal animals. So I mean, sure, safety and security, but also affection, connection, being seen and heard, belonging. So we don't know what the gunman needed that night. We may never know. Whatever it was, Christina may have stumbled on it by accident or by instinct, but he wanted it more than money. And it was strong enough to deflect a bullet and maybe save a life and maybe more. So the question to us becomes, wouldn't it be great if we could marshal that and create those results in critical situations and it wasn't a miracle? Wouldn't it be great if we were adept at handling human interactions so that we could keep conflict from escalating, or so that we could sidestep it altogether? And in my experience, we can. And what that takes is reimagining compassion, not as kind of simple warmth or kindness, but instead a set of concrete practices that you can use when you don't want to get into a test of wills, that you can use when you're afraid that force will fail or escalate or backfire. Pretty simple set of practices. So listen for a call for help, share empathy, and share options. How would that look? Well, here's an example that comes from work that I've done in healthcare. Comes up pretty often. How do you cope with a patient or a family member who's really upset? This comes from work that I did in a youth mental health clinic in a really, really difficult part of town. So there's a woman in the lobby, and she's a patient's mother, and she's screaming and yelling and stomping. She's yelling at her kids, "You better get the hell over here. You better sit your butt down. You better listen to your mother." And she's yelling at the receptionist, "You better get me in to see my damn doctor." They send out a security guard, he says, "Ma'am, you can't talk that way." She ignores him. The lobby's electric. So put yourself in that situation, what are you going to do? If you're like most people, you're going to try to get her to calm down. And that's what David tried. He was the therapist who had to go out and deal with her. He said, "Ma'am, I need you to calm down." You're right. You're right. Didn't work. Failed utterly. So, what we want to get clear on is why it failed. And the reason that it failed is that he was dealing at the level of actions, not at the level of deep-seated needs that we've been talking about. So imagine a bullseye that has needs at its center and actions at the periphery. Here's the problem. This woman comes in, and you can tell she's got some really deep-seated needs, yes? So she tries to come up with an action plan that will meet those needs. And when she comes up with one, she gets attached to it. Becomes if only I can carry out these actions, I'll get these needs met. And so those actions stand in place of those needs. So when David walks up and says, "You can't do those actions," he becomes an enemy that's coming between her and what she needs. And two things happen. He becomes an enemy, someone standing between her and her needs, and she escalates. So she won't listen to him, and she escalates. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to go through that process that we talked about. Listen for a call for help. And that means thinking about that dynamic that we talked about before and bypassing actions and going to needs. So looking at that woman and saying, she is not an opponent that I need to stop. She is a person with needs that she needs badly, and she's afraid she's going to fail. And that flips a switch in me, and I begin to get more open. Then I can exchange empathy with her. So essentially that means going to this person that I used to see as an opponent and saying, "What do you need?" And you can use emotions as a guide. So if I'm getting my needs met, I'm some kind of happy. If I'm not getting my needs met, I'm some kind of suffering. I'm in pain or I'm angry. So David steps up to this woman and says, "You seem really upset." That's the emotion. "Do you need attention?" That's the need. She didn't thank him, right? Because that's the point she's been trying to get across for 30 minutes. But if he can keep that up, if he can keep up acknowledging her needs and acknowledging her feelings, she'll experience that as empathy. A switch will begin to flip in her, and she'll begin to open up. And what David found out when that happened was that there was a lot of fear behind this woman's anger. Her eldest son had just been thrown out of his third daycare for aggression, essentially for bullying. And she didn't see how she was going to get him care and put food on the table, so she was near tears. Now that David understands that, he's faced with a whole different problem than he thought he was. So now he can begin to share options with her. What looked at first like it was a demand for her to get in to see her doctor now shows up as something that can be solved a whole variety of ways. We can call your daycare center and explain to them what's going on. We can get a referral to another agency. We can call your neighbors and see if we can enlist them. And there are other options. So there are a whole variety of options, and that's important because what we're driving with this form of compassion is collaboration. It's not domination, it's not intimidation, it's not submission, and it's not compromise. This isn't yell quieter. This is a new set of options that didn't seem to be on the table before we could talk to each other. And that model that I've just laid out to you works really well one-on-one, and it works across domains. So it works all throughout healthcare, but we've also discovered that it works with parents who want cooperation from their kids, or mothers who want a better experience of life with her mother, or an executive who's got a corporate initiative and is trying to get cooperation from another executive who doesn't owe it to him. So it transfers across domains. But you might ask yourself, okay, good. It works with friends and family, it works with colleagues, it works with customers. That's nice. What about people who hate you? What about your enemies? And it's great that it works one-on-one, but we have systemic issues. What about systems? Does it work on a system-wide basis? And Connie Rice might have been asking herself those kinds of questions a few years ago. Connie Rice is a civil rights attorney and activist in LA. And her lawsuits have brought in better than $10 billion in damages as she's tried to protect and fight for communities like the Watts neighborhood in LA. You may be familiar with the Watts neighborhood. It's got a tough history. That's a place that people described as a cross between a tenement and a dilapidated army barracks. In 1965, you might remember the riots ended up in 34 deaths and $40 million in property damage. And when you're talking about property damage as a result of riots in your neighborhood, you're talking about rocks and bullets and broken glass and fire. Riots again following Rodney King's arrest in 1991, this time 55 deaths and $1 billion in damages. That's a tough neighborhood. In the 80s and 90s, there were so many homicides in this neighborhood that parents took to having their kids sleep in the bathtub. And the police responded with paramilitary campaigns. You may remember Cops in Riot Gear. Campaigns that went by names such as Crash or Operation Hammer. And it was as a result of those campaigns and the Rodney King incident, Connie Rice went to war. In her words, went to war with the LA Police Department and began to launch lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit and was successful until she stopped. And you might wonder why she stopped after 20 years. And the reason was she looked at that neighborhood and said, this will never be enough. These lawsuits will never end. You cannot legislate behavior change. This community I'm trying to protect is segregating and, in her words, turning into a killing zone. So what do? She said, this problem will be solved with empathy and compassion. Over the course of 18 months, she interviewed 900 police officers. Think of what an act of courage that is. To go into the heart of a group that you've been fighting for 20 years and ask, what do you need? And what she heard was fear beneath the brutality. Time and time again, Ms. Rice, I'm terrified of black men. Ms. Rice, you know those black men, they come out of prison, they have that great Hulk strength. I'm afraid they're going to kill me. Can you teach me how not to be afraid of black men? How tough is that to hear from a group of people who've pulled over your neighbors, pulled them out of their cars, thrown them on the ground, and searched them with no provocation? And her response to that was not labeling them, but saying, to me and my community, that sounds like racism. To you, it doesn't. It's a true expression of fear. And any solution that we're going to come up with that's going to work has got to work for my community, and it's got to work for you as well. So we need to work together. There's a model of courage. So they came up with a new model of policing. They brought together the community, civil rights advocates, the police force, and they came up with a four-pronged model of policing. Police hanging out in the neighborhoods, tutoring kids, setting up sports teams, and even setting up health screenings. And you got to ask yourself, come on, this is a gang-torn neighborhood. This is a neighborhood with a paramilitary presence in it. And you're gonna form study groups and health screenings. How did that work? In Nickerson Gardens, where it was piloted, 66% drop in property crime, 90% drop in physical crime. That means people getting hurt. The Watts neighborhood is still torn by struggle between police and the residents, but overall, 70% drop in homicides. Been very effective. It's held up as a model around the country. And that model that we talked about, that model of interacting, of showing compassion and empathy, works system-wide in other areas as well. It works when, for example, you're trying to reduce recidivism among prison inmates, and it's been shown to be effective at fighting bullying in school districts where zero-tolerance policies fail. So it generalizes. What's the takeaway? Compassion is power. Compassion is not what you fall back on when force fails. Compassion, if done deliberately, can turn enemies into allies. And when that happens, you're solving different problems that you started with. And you're facing solutions that weren't on the table and weren't in your imagination when you started. Compassion is power. So what does that mean to you? I don't know what part of the world you're trying to change, or what change you may feel being thrust upon you right now. But wouldn't it be great to be powerful? Wouldn't it be great if you could create results like that at critical times and it wasn't a miracle? And you can. You can win and other people don't have to lose. You can create change and you don't have to force people. And the process can be healing. So how do you start? Next time you're toe-to-toe with somebody, whether that's face-to-face or whether that's over Twitter or over Facebook or whatever social media you have, next time you're face-to-face with someone who opposes you, who threatens you, who annoys you, who angers you, who you see as an enemy, consider that the 4 most powerful words that you can use may not be, "This will not stand." It might be, "What do you need?" Thank you.